Welcome to another deep dive.
Oh, this is going to be a good one.
Today, we're tackling the design process in tech ed.
Yeah.
It's that toolkit for solving problems,
Mm-hmm.
from building robots to
Yeah.
designing websites, even navigating those tricky life decisions.
It really is a toolkit for everything.
And we've got excerpts from a presentation all about it.
Oh, cool.
It's called The Design Process in Tech Ed.
Okay.
So let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So it's interesting. We often associate design with the artistic side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But this deep dive reveals it's really about problem solving at its core.
Absolutely.
And in tech,
Well, in tech,
that's a skill you need every single day.
you need it every day. You can't get around it.
Absolutely. And the presentation really emphasizes that it's not just about memorizing steps.
Right.
It's about using them to solve actual problems, explaining your solutions to others, and then taking that crucial step back to evaluate designs.
That evaluation part, I think that's what gets missed a lot. People just want to jump into building, but taking that step back is so crucial.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
What I found fascinating is how the source material emphasizes communication and evaluation as key design skills.
Mm-hmm.
It's not enough to simply come up with a solution. You have to be able to articulate it
Right.
and understand its strengths and weaknesses.
Right. Like, you could have the most brilliant idea, but if
Oh.
you can't communicate it, it's useless.
Exactly.
And then on the flip side, even if you can communicate it, if you don't know how to evaluate it, you might be missing key flaws.
Exactly.
So,
You could be building on a shaky foundation.
Yeah, exactly.
And I see that playing out in agile development all the time.
Oh, yeah,
A methodology that's becoming so prevalent in tech ed.
for sure.
You're constantly getting feedback, iterating, and refining. So this idea of design as an ongoing process, not a one-and-done deal, really resonates.
Absolutely.
It's that loop, right? You're never truly finished.
You're never truly finished. And that's what I love about it.
It keeps things dynamic. It keeps things exciting.
And it's so much more reflective of how things work in the real world, right?
Right.
It's not like you come up with an idea and boom, it's done.
Right.
It's constant evolution,
Yeah.
constant improvement.
Constant improvement.
Think about like game developers.
Oh, yeah.
They release a beta version,
Yeah.
get feedback from players, and then make adjustments based on what they learn.
Yeah.
So it's this constant loop of testing, refining,
Yeah.
improving.
Improving. It's never really finished, is it?
No, never really finished.
And that ties directly back to the design process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a linear set of steps.
Right.
You can revisit and revise them as needed. Right.
Exactly.
Like you were saying, it's a loop, not a straight line.
Exactly. It's like, it's both structured but flexible.
Right.
It gives you a framework, but
Yeah.
you can, experiment and adapt as you go.
And it's interesting. This actually makes me think of my nephew. He's on a robotics team.
Oh, cool.
And they use this iterative approach to problem solve all the time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Their robot might work initially, but then they see how it performs in competition. And they have to make tweaks to improve its speed or functionality.
Oh, yeah.
It's fascinating to watch them work through the process.
I bet.
They're learning by doing. They're
Yes.
iterating.
Exactly.
They're embodying this whole design process.
That's a perfect example of how it plays out in a real-world tech ed setting. And you know what? The presentation highlights that this mindset isn't just for tech.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's for everyone.
For everyone.
It's for everyone.
Okay, so if anyone can use it, how does the presentation see this applying outside of a purely tech context?
Well, it encourages students to view themselves as, confident problem solvers,
Right.
regardless of what field they end up in.
Mm-hmm.
And it pushes this idea that the design process isn't just for building something brand new, it's also for improving what already exists.
So like taking an app that's already popular but has a clunky interface.
Yes.
You could use the design process to target that specific problem and make it more user-friendly.
Exactly.
Because it's already out there, it already exists.
Yeah.
But there's room for improvement.
Absolutely. It's about identifying those areas for improvement, no matter how small, and applying that same design thinking to make things better.
Yeah.
I mean, think about all the updates your favorite apps have gone through.
Yeah.
Each update is like a mini design process in action.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right, where developers are gathering feedback, identifying pain points, implementing solutions.
It's a constant evolution.
It is.
And that resonates so much with what we discussed about evaluation being a key design skill.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to analyze what's working and what's not is so crucial, especially in a field like tech ed where things change so rapidly.
It's like if you're not constantly evaluating, you're going to fall behind.
Yeah.
You know?
You got to stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting how the presentation emphasizes that this is something students in tech ed are specifically learning to do. So it's not just building from scratch, it's analyzing, critiquing, and refining existing products too.
Exactly. They're learning to apply the design process to enhance existing solutions,
Right.
which is such a valuable skill in today's tech world.
Totally agree.
It's all about fostering that mindset of continuous improvement, which, it goes beyond just tech.
Right.
It really applies to any field.
And I think that's a perfect place to kind of pause for a moment.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground already. We've talked about the iterative nature of the design process, its problem-solving core, and its applicability beyond just tech.
Right.
But there's another key element that the presentation brings up,
Okay.
and that's communication.
Oh, communication. That's a big one.
Huge. And it makes me wonder, how do we go beyond just having a good idea
Right.
and actually convey it to others effectively, especially when designing something new?
Because, like we were saying before, if you can't communicate it, it doesn't matter how good the idea is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're stuck.
Yeah.
And our deep dive source really stresses that, communication is key, especially when it comes to sharing and receiving feedback on designs.
Oh, absolutely.
It's something that tech ed students are learning too, So how do you think that plays out in a classroom setting?
That's a great question. I think it really speaks to the collaborative nature of design.
Okay.
It's not just about working in isolation. It's about being able to clearly articulate your ideas.
Yeah.
Both verbally, and visually to get feedback and iterate on your designs.
Yeah, and we've barely scratched the surface.
I know.
There's so much more to explore about the specific steps involved and how those steps are being implemented in tech ed today.
For sure.
But before we get to that,
Yeah.
I want to pose a question to you, our listener.
Okay.
Thinking about how you might use the design process in your own life, what communication skills would be most important for you?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's something to think about.
It is. It really depends on the specific problem you're trying to solve and the people you need to communicate with.
Right. It's all context.
Yeah, exactly. So before we jumped into the break, we left you with a great question to think about. What communication skills are most crucial for you when using the design process?
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the steps themselves.
Right.
But clear communication, that can make or break a project, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially in a field like tech ed where you're often collaborating with others.
For sure. For sure.
Speaking of steps, our source material, the design process in tech ed, highlights those repeatable steps. But
yeah.
I'm curious, what stood out to you about how the presentation framed them?
Well, it's interesting, because the presentation emphasizes that the steps aren't a rigid checklist.
Okay.
It uses terms like repeatable, iterative, and stresses that the process is not always linear. I think that's a key takeaway, especially for anyone new to the design process.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a roadmap, not a set of strict instructions, right?
Exactly.
You can adjust your course as you go based on what you learn.
Precisely.
And this idea of repetition or revision being key,
Yeah.
it actually reminds me of something called version control.
Oh, yeah.
A system used by developers in tech ed to track and manage changes to software.
Right.
It's all about iterating on previous versions to create the best possible final product.
That's such a great connection.
Yeah.
It really is. It highlights how these principles embedded in the design process are woven into, the very fabric of how tech is developed and taught today.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it is. So let's say you're a student and you've been tasked with designing an educational app. You wouldn't just jump into coding, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
I imagine you'd start by defining the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
What are the learning objectives? Who is your target audience? What are their specific needs? It seems like a crucial first step, especially in an educational context.
Absolutely. Understanding the needs of your users, it's paramount.
Yeah.
You might even involve them in the design process itself, through user research or feedback sessions.
Getting them involved from the start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then once you have a clear understanding of the problem, you can move on to brainstorming potential solutions.
And this is where things get exciting.
This is where the creativity comes in.
Yeah. You could introduce gamification elements, incorporate interactive simulations, or experiment with different app development frameworks like React Native, which is becoming increasingly popular in tech ed.
Oh, yeah. React Native is huge right now.
It's a game changer.
It is. It's all about exploring different possibilities. And coming up with creative solutions that meet the needs of your users and align with the educational goals of the app.
So many options.
So many options. And then once you have a few promising ideas,
Yeah.
you would move on to prototyping.
Okay, so we're talking rough drafts, mock-ups, maybe even some basic code to bring the concept to life, right?
Exactly. Prototyping is all about bringing your ideas into a tangible form,
Okay.
even if it's just a rough sketch on paper.
Right.
This allows you to test your concepts, gather feedback, and make revisions before, investing too much time and effort into a fully developed solution.
And I can see how this stage, especially in a tech ed setting, could be a fantastic opportunity to bring in different skill sets.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe you've got students who excel at graphic design, creating the visual mock-ups, while others with a knack for coding are building a basic prototype.
You're right. Collaboration becomes so crucial here.
Yeah.
It really mirrors how real-world tech teams operate.
Bringing everyone's strengths to the table.
Exactly. And then, once you have a prototype, it's time to test it out.
Good.
This could involve user testing, A/B testing, or even presenting your prototype to peers for feedback.
Getting that outside perspective.
Exactly. It's a vital part of the iterative process because it allows you to identify areas for improvement and refine your design based on real-world feedback.
And then, armed with that feedback, you loop back around.
Right. You got it.
Maybe you tweak the interface, add a new feature, or even completely rethink your approach based on what you've learned. It's that cycle of testing, revising, and refining that ultimately leads to a successful product.
Exactly. And, the presentation really drives home the point that this process isn't just limited to creating something entirely new.
Right.
It can be used to improve existing products as well.
We touched on that a bit earlier, but can you give us a more concrete example of how that might play out, say, in a classroom setting?
Absolutely. Let's say students are learning about accessibility in web design. They could use the design process to evaluate an existing website,
Right.
identify areas that could be improved for users with disabilities, and then propose and implement those changes. They might use tools like screen readers or color contrast analyzers to evaluate the website's current accessibility and then apply design thinking to make it more inclusive.
That's such a relevant example.
Yeah, it is.
And it really showcases how the design process can be used to promote equity and accessibility in tech, which is becoming increasingly important in the field. It also highlights how this framework, as much as it's about problem solving, also cultivates a sense of empathy and a user-centered design approach.
That's an excellent point. It's not just about building something that works. It's about building something that works for everyone.
And this idea of works for everyone reminds me of universal design principles.
Oh, yes.
Which are being integrated into many tech ed programs. It's this idea that you design products and environments from the get-go to be usable by as many people as possible, regardless of their abilities or disabilities. It's fascinating how these concepts are all interconnected.
They really are. And it speaks to the power of the design process as a tool for creating positive change in the world.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, there's one more key takeaway from the presentation that I want to touch on.
Okay.
And that's the emphasis on applying the design process beyond just tech.
Right. It explicitly states that anyone can use it.
Yeah.
And it encourages students to see themselves as problem solvers.
That's really powerful, isn't it?
It is.
But I have to admit, sometimes it's hard to see how this seemingly technical process translates to everyday life.
I get that.
Can you give us a concrete example of how someone might apply the design process outside of a technical context?
Absolutely. Think about planning a big event like a community fundraiser. You could start by defining your goals. How much money do you want to raise? What kind of impact do you want to make? Then you could brainstorm ideas for the event itself. A concert, a silent auction, a 5K run.
I'm seeing the steps come alive here.
Right.
You'd move on to prototyping, maybe by creating a budget, reaching out to potential sponsors, or even scoping out venues. And then critically, you'd get feedback from your team, from potential attendees, even from people who've organized similar events in the past.
Exactly. And you would use that feedback to refine your plans, adjust your budget, maybe even rethink the type of event you want to host.
Right.
It's the same iterative process we've been talking about, just applied to a different context.
It's incredible how versatile the design process can be. And it makes me wonder how learning about and practicing these skills in a tech ed setting might influence the way students approach challenges in other areas of their lives.
That's a fascinating question. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the steps themselves to real-world applications. And I think it's clear that the design process is more than just a set of instructions. It's a mindset.
It's a way of approaching problems with creativity, flexibility, and a commitment to making things better.
Absolutely.
But there's one final key takeaway from our source material that we haven't fully unpacked yet, and that's the importance of evaluation.
Right. The presentation specifically mentions that communication and evaluation are key skills for designers.
Yeah.
And we've touched on it throughout our conversation, but it deserves a deeper dive of its own.
So join us for the final part of this deep dive, where we'll explore what it means to evaluate designs, both your own and those of others, and how this skill is being cultivated in the world of tech ed. We're back for the final part of our deep dives into the design process in tech ed.
And it's a big one.
It is. We've explored the steps, that iterative nature, even how those concepts reach beyond tech and into everyday life.
Right.
And we've touched on how crucial communication is
Mm-hmm.
throughout the entire process. But our source material, the design process in tech ed, it really emphasizes another key skill right alongside communication.
Oh, for sure.
Evaluation.
It's so important.
That's right. The presentation specifically states that communication and evaluation are key skills for designers, but so far we focus more on the creation and refinement aspects. So let's unpack what it actually means to evaluate a design,
Yeah, let's get into that.
whether it's your own or someone else's.
Right, because it's not just about saying, I like it or I don't like it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about digging deeper, isn't it?
It is. It's about asking those tough questions.
Okay. So what kind of questions are we talking about here?
Well, like, does this solution actually solve the problem it set out to tackle?
Right. Getting to the core of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is it intuitive to use? Does it meet the needs of the people it's intended for?
All those critical questions that sometimes we shy away from.
We do, because they can be hard to answer,
They can be.
but they're essential.
They are. So evaluation in design, it sounds like it's about judging a solution's effectiveness, its usability, its impact, and it relies heavily on getting feedback from others.
Yes.
This is where that collaboration piece we talked about earlier comes back in real.
Absolutely. You can't do it alone.
It's not just the designer in a vacuum making these judgments.
Nope. You need outside perspectives.
Right. So where does that feedback come from?
Well, it can come from all sorts of sources. Potential users, of course.
Right. The people who will actually be using it.
Exactly. Other designers who can bring a fresh perspective.
Okay.
Experts in the field who can provide those technical insights. Sometimes, even people completely unfamiliar with the project can offer surprising observations.
That's interesting. So it's about getting a diverse range of feedback.
It is. It's about getting a 360-degree view of your design.
And avoiding that tunnel vision that we can sometimes get stuck in.
Exactly.
But feedback, especially the critical kind, can be tough to take. How does the presentation address that aspect of evaluation?
Well, it highlights the importance of being open to critique, even if it stings a bit, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It's not about defending your design at all costs. It's about identifying those areas for improvement.
Right, because ultimately that's what we want, right?
Exactly.
We want to make things better.
We do.
And sometimes that means hearing things we don't necessarily want to hear.
It does, but it's part of the process.
It's part of the growth.
It is. It's like that growth mindset idea, but applied specifically to the design process.
I like that. You have to be willing to learn and adapt based on what you hear, even if it means, going back to the drawing board.
Absolutely.
Starting over.
And you know what? The presentation points out that students in tech ed, they're learning to evaluate not just their own work,
Interesting.
but the designs of others as well. Think about a peer review session in a web development class. Students are providing constructive criticism, analyzing each other's code, suggesting improvements to the user interface.
Right, so they're learning to give feedback too.
Yeah.
Not just receive it,
It's a two-way street.
which is so valuable, regardless of what field those students end up in.
I agree.
Whether you're an engineer, an entrepreneur, a teacher, being able to analyze and provide constructive feedback, that's a skill you'll use throughout your life.
It is.
It's not just about, tearing something down.
Right.
It's about understanding the why behind a design choice and suggesting alternatives that might be more effective or user-friendly.
Exactly. And that ties back to something we discussed earlier, the importance of empathy in the design process. You have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the user, understand their needs and perspectives to truly evaluate a design effectively.
Right, because if you don't understand the user,
You're missing a huge piece of the puzzle.
you're missing the whole point.
You are.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the design process in tech ed, we've explored its problem-solving core, those iterative steps, how it can be applied beyond tech, and the crucial roles of communication and evaluation. It's really more than just a set of instructions, isn't it?
It's a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching problems with creativity, flexibility, and a commitment to making things better.
And by learning about and practicing the design process, students are gaining valuable skills that will empower them to become confident problem solvers in all aspects of their lives. It's fascinating how much can be packed into a single presentation like this.
I know, it really makes you think.
It does. It makes you want to go out and start applying these concepts. But now it's time for us to step back and let you, our listener, do some evaluating of your own. How might learning about the design process change the way you approach problems, whether they're technical, personal, or somewhere in between?
What challenges could you tackle using this framework?
We encourage you to give it a try. Pick a problem you're facing, even a small one. Walk through those steps. You might be surprised by the solutions you uncover and the creative thinking you unlock along the way.
The possibilities are endless.
That's all for today's deep dive.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for being here.